The Door of Unrest, by O. Henry. I sat an hour by sun, in the editor's room of the Montopolis Weekly Bugle. I was the editor. The saffron rays of the declining sunlight filtered through the cornstalks in Michob Ader's garden patch and cast an amber glory upon my paste pot. I sat at the editorial desk in my non-rotary revolving chair and prepared my editorial against the oligarchies. The room, with its one window, was already a prey to the twilight. One by one, with my trenchant sentences, I lopped off the heads of the political hydra while I listened, full of kindly peace, to the homecoming cowbells and wondered what Mrs. Flanagan was going to have for supper. Then in from the dusky, quiet street there drifted and perched himself upon a corner of my desk old father, Time's younger brother. His face was beardless and as gnarled as an English walnut. I never saw clothes such as he wore. They would have reduced Joseph's coat to a monochrome, but the colors were not the dyer's. Stains and patches and the work of sun and rust were responsible for the diversity. On his coarse shoes was the dust, conceivably, of 1,000 leagues. I can describe him no further, except to say that he was little and weird and old. Old I began to estimate in centuries when I saw him. Yes, and I remember that there was an odor, a faint odor like aloes, or possibly like myrrh or leather. And I thought of museums. And then I reached for a pad and pencil, for business is business, and visits of the oldest inhabitants are sacred and honorable, requiring to be chronicled. I am glad to see you, sir, I said. I would offer you a chair, but, you see, sir, I went on, I have lived in Montopolis only 3 weeks, and I have not met many of our citizens. I turned a doubtful eye upon his dust-stained shoes, and concluded with a newspaper phrase, I suppose that you reside in our midst? My visitor fumbled in his raiment, drew forth a soiled card, and handed it to me. Upon it was written, in plain but unsteadily formed characters, the name Michob Ader. I am glad you called, Mr. Ader, I said. As one of our older citizens, you must view with pride the recent growth and enterprise of Montopolis. Among other improvements, I think I can promise that the town will now be provided with a live, enterprising new spa. Do you know the name on that card? Asked my caller, interrupting me. It is not a familiar one to me, I said. Again he visited the depths of his ancient vestments. This time he brought out a torn leaf of some book or journal, brown and flimsy with age. The heading of the page was the Crucifixion old-style type. The printing upon it was this. There is a man come to Paris in this year 1643 who pretends to have lived these 1600 years. He says of himself that he was a shoemaker in Jerusalem at the time of the Crucifixion, that his name is Michob Ader, and that when Jesus, the Christian Messiah, was condemned by Pontius Pilate, the Roman president, he paused to rest while bearing his cross to the place of crucifixion before the door of Michob Ader. The shoemaker struck Jesus with his fist, saying, Go, why tarriest thou? The Messiah answered him, I indeed am going, but thou shalt tarry until I come, thereby condemning him to live until the day of judgment. He lives forever, but at the end of every 100 years he falls into a fit or trance, on recovering from which he finds himself in the same state of youth in which he was when Jesus suffered, being then about 30 years of age. Such is the story of the wandering Jew, as told by Michob Ader, who relates, here the printing ended. I must have muttered aloud something to myself about the wandering Jew, for the old man spake up, bitterly and loudly. "'Tis a lie," said he, "like 9/10 of what ye call history. 'Tis a Gentile I am, and no Jew. I am after footing it out of Jerusalem, my son. But if that makes me a Jew, then everything that comes out of a bottle is baby's milk. Ye have my name on the card ye hold, and ye have read the bit of paper they call the Crucifixion that printed the news when I stepped into their office on the 12th day of June, in the year 1643, just as I have called upon ye today." I laid down my pencil and pad. Clearly it would not do. Here was an item for the local column of the but it would not do. Still, fragments of the impossible personal began to flit through my conventionalized brain. Uncle Michob is as spry on his legs as a young chap of only 1,000 or so. Our venerable caller relates with pride that George Ptolemy the Great, once dandled him on his knee at his father's house. Uncle Michob says that our wet spring was nothing in comparison with the dampness that ruined the crops around Mount Ararat when he was a boy. But no, it would not do. I was trying to think of some conversational subject with which to interest my visitor, and was hesitating between walking matches and the Pliocene age, when the old man suddenly began to weep poignantly and distressfully. "Cheer up, Mr. Ader," I said, a little awkwardly. "This matter may blow over in a few hundred years more. There has already been a decided reaction in favor of Judas Iscariot and Colonel Burr and the celebrated violinist, Signor Nero. This is the age of whitewash. You must not allow yourself to become downhearted." Unknowingly, I had struck a chord. The old man blinked belligerently through his senile tears. "'Tis time," he said, "that the liars be doing justice to somebody. Your historians are no more than a pack of old women gabbling at a wake. A finer man than the Emperor Nero never wore sandals. Man, I was at the burning of Rome. I knowed the emperor well, for in them days I was a well-known char actor. In them days they had respect for a man that lived forever. But 'twas of the Emperor Nero I was going to tell ye. I struck into Rome, up the Appian Way, on the night of July the 16th, the year 64. I had just stepped down by way of Siberia and Afghanistan, and one foot of me had a frostbite, and the other a blister burned by the sand of the desert, and I was feeling a bit blue from doing patrol duty from the North Pole down to the last chance corner in Patagonia, and being miscalled a Jew in the bargain. Well, I'm telling ye I was passing the Circus Maximus, and it was dark as pitch over the way, and then I heard somebody sing out, "Is that you, Michob?" Over against the wall, hid out amongst a pile of barrels and old dry goods boxes, was the Emperor Nero with his toggy wrapped around his toes, smoking a long, black cigar. "Have one, Michob," says he. "None of the weeds for me," says I, "neither pipe nor cigar." "What's the use," says I, "of smoking when ye've not got the ghost of a chance of killing yeself by doing it?" "True for ye, Michob Ader, my perpetual Jew," says the emperor, "ye're not always wandering. Sure, 'tis danger gives the spice of our pleasures, next to their being forbidden." "And for what," says I, "do ye smoke be night in dark places without even a centurion in plain clothes to attend ye?" "Have ye ever heard, Michob," says the emperor, "of predestinarianism?" "I've had the cousin of it," says I. "I've been on the trot with pedestrianism for many a year, and more to come, as ye well know." "The longer word," says me friend Nero, "is the tackin' of this new sect of people they call the Christians. 'Tis them that's responsible for me smokin' be night in holes and corners of the dark. And then I sets down and takes off a shoe and rubs me foot that is frosted, and the emperor tells me about it. It seems that since I passed that way before, the emperor had mandamus the impress wid a divorce suit, and Mrs. Papilla, a celebrated lady, was engaged, without references, as housekeeper at the palace. All in one day, says the emperor. She puts up new lace windy curtains in the palace and joins the anti-tobacco society, and when I feels the need of a smoke, I must be after sneaking out to these piles of lumber in the dark. So there in the dark me and the emperor sat, and I told him of me travels. And when they say the emperor was an incendiary, they lie. 'Twas that night the fire started that burnt the city. 'Tis my opinion that it began from a stump of seeger that he threw down among the boxes. And 'tis a lie that he fiddled. He did all he could for 6 days to stop it, sir. And now I detected a new flavor to Mr. Michob Ader. It had not been myrrh or balm or hyssop that I had smelled. The emanation was the odor of bad whiskey, and, worse still, of low comedy, the sort that small humorists manufacture by clothing the grave and reverend things of legend and history in the vulgar, topical frippery that passes for a certain kind of wit. Michob Ader as an impostor, claiming 1900 years, and playing his part with the decency of respectable lunacy, I could endure. But as a tedious wag, cheapening his egregious story with songbook levity, his importance as an entertainer grew less. And then, as if he suspected my thoughts, he suddenly shifted his key. "You'll excuse me, sir," he whined, "but sometimes I get a little mixed in my head. I am a very old man, and it is hard to remember everything." I knew that he was right, and that I should not try to reconcile him with Roman history. So I asked for news concerning other ancients with whom he had walked familiar. Above my desk hung an engraving of Raphael's cherubs. You could yet make out their forms, though the dust blurred their outlines strangely. "Ye calls them cherubs," cackled the old man. "Babes, ye fancy they are, with wings. And there's one with legs and a bow and arrow that ye call Cupid. I know where they was found. The great-great-great-grandfather of Thim all was a billy goat. Being an editor, sir, do ye happen to know where Solomon's temple stood?" I fancied that it was in Persia? Well, I did not know. 'Tis not in history nor in the Bible where it was. But I saw it, myself. The first pictures of cherubs and cupids was sculptured upon thin walls and pillars. Two of the biggest, sir, stood in the adytum to form the baldachin over the Arkansas. But the wings of Thim's sculptures was intended for horns, and the faces was the faces of goats. 10,000 goats there was in and about the temple, and your cherubs was billy goats in the days of King Solomon, but the painters misconstrued the horns into wings. And I knew Tamerlane, the lame Timur, sir, very well. I saw him at Keghut and at Zaranj. He was a little man no larger than yourself, with hair the color of an amber pipe stem. They buried him at Samarkand. I was at the wake, sir. Oh, he was a fine-built man in his coffin, 6 feet long, with black whiskers to his face. And I see him throw turnips at the Emperor Vespasian in Africa. All over the world I have tramped, sir, without the body of me find in any rest. 'Twas so commanded I saw Jerusalem destroyed, and Pompeii go up in the fireworks, and I was at the coronation of Charlemagne and the lynch-in of Joan of Arc. And everywhere I go there comes storms and revolutions and plagues and fires. 'Twas so commanded. Ye have heard of the wandering Jew. 'Tis also, except that divil a bit am I a Jew. But history lies, as I have told ye. Are ye quite sure, sir, that ye haven't a drop of whiskey convenient? Ye well know that I have many miles of walking before me. I have none, said I, and if you please, I am about to leave for my supper. I pushed my chair back creakingly. This ancient landlubber was becoming as great an affliction as any cross-bowed mariner. He shook a musty effluvium from his piebald clothes, overturned my inkstand, and went on with his insufferable nonsense. I wouldn't mind it so much, he complained, if it wasn't for the work I must do on Good Fridays. You know about Pontius Pilate, sir, of course. His body, when he killed himself, was pitched into a lake on the Alps mountains. Now, listen to the job that 'tis mine to perform on the night of Ivory Good Friday. The old divil goes down in the pool and drags up Pontius, and the water is bilin' and spewin' like a wash pot. And the old divil sets the body on top of a throne on the rocks, and thin comes me share of the job. Oh, sir, ye would pity me thin. Ye would pray for the poor wandering Jew that niver was a Jew, if ye could see the horror of the thing that I must do. 'Tis I that must fetch a bowl of water, and kneel down before it till it washes its hands. I declare to ye that Pontius Pilate, a man dead 200 years, dragged up with the lake slime coverin' him and fishes wrigglin' inside of him widout eyes, and in the discomposition of the body, sits there, sir, and washes his hands in the bowl I hold for him on Good Fridays. 'Twas so commanded. Clearly, the matter had progressed far beyond the scope of the evil's local column. There might have been employment here for the alienist or for those who circulate the pledge, but I had had enough of it. I got up and repeated that I must go. At this he seized my coat, grovelled upon my desk, and burst again into distressful weeping. Whatever it was about, I said to myself that his grief was genuine. "Come now, Mr. Ader," I said, soothingly. "What is the matter?" The answer came brokenly through his racking sobs. "Because I would not let the poor Christ rest upon the step." His hallucination seemed beyond all reasonable answer, yet the effect of it upon him scarcely merited disrespect. But I knew nothing that might assuage it, and I told him once more that both of us should be leaving the office at once. Obedient at last, he raised himself from my disheveled desk and permitted me to half lift him to the floor. The gale of his grief had blown away his words, His freshet of tears had soaked away the crust of his grief. Reminiscence died in him, at least the coherent part of it. "'Twas me that did it," he muttered, as I led him toward the door. "Me, the shoemaker of Jerusalem." I got him to the sidewalk, and in the augmented light I saw that his face was seared and lined and warped by a sadness almost incredibly the product of a single lifetime. And then high up in the firmamental darkness we heard the clamant cries of some great, passing birds. My wandering Jew lifted his hand, with side-tilted head. "The 7 whistlers," he said, as one introduces well-known friends. "Wild geese," said I, "but I confess that their number is beyond me." "They follow me everywhere," he said. "'Twas so commanded. What ye hear is the souls of the 7 Jews that helped with the crucifixion. Sometimes they're plovers and sometimes geese, but you'll find them always flying where I go." I stood, uncertain how to take my leave. I looked down the street, shuffled my feet, looked back again, and felt my hair rise. The old man had disappeared. And then my capillaries relaxed, for I dimly saw him footing it away through the darkness. But he walked so swiftly and silently and contrary to the gait promised by his age that my composure was not all restored, though I knew not why. That night I was foolish enough to take down some dust-covered volumes from my modest shelves. I searched Hermippus Redivivus and Salathiel and the Pepys collection in vain. And then in a book called The Citizen of the World, and in one 2 centuries old, I came upon what I desired. Michob Ader had indeed come to Paris in the year 1643, and related to the Turkish spy an extraordinary story. He claimed to be the wandering Jew, and that. But here I fell asleep, for my editorial duties had not been light that day. Judge Hoover was the Bugle's candidate for Congress. Having to confer with him, I sought his home early the next morning, and we walked together downtown through a little street with which I was unfamiliar. "Did you ever hear of Michob Ader?" I asked him, smiling. "Why, yes," said the judge. "And that reminds me of my shoes he has for mending. Here is his shop now." Judge Hoover stepped into a dingy, small shop. I looked up at the sign and saw Michob Ader, boot and shoemaker, on it. Some wild geese passed above, honking clearly. I scratched my ear and frowned, and then trailed into the shop. There sat my wandering Jew on his shoemaker's bench, trimming a half-sole. He was drabbled with dew, grass-stained, unkempt, and miserable. And on his face was still the unexplained wretchedness, the problematic sorrow, the esoteric woe that had been written there by nothing less, it seemed, than the stylus of the centuries. Judge Hoover inquired kindly concerning his shoes. The old shoemaker looked up and spoke sanely enough. He had been ill, he said, for a few days. The next day the shoes would be ready. He looked at me, and I could see that I had no place in his memory. So out we went, and on our way. "Old Mike," remarked the candidate, "has been on one of his sprees. He gets crazy drunk regularly once a month, but he's a good shoemaker." "What is his history?" I inquired. "Whiskey," epitomized Judge Hoover. "That explains him." I was silent, but I did not accept the explanation, and so, when I had the chance, I asked Old Man Sellers, who browsed daily on my exchanges. "Michob Ader," said he, "was making shoes in Montopolis when I come here going on 15 year ago. I guess whiskey's his trouble. Once a month he gets off the track, and stays so a week. He's got a rigmarole something about his being a Jew peddler that he tells everybody. Nobody won't listen to him anymore. When he's sober he ain't such a fool. He's got a sight of books in the back room of his shop that he reads. I guess you can lay all his trouble to whiskey." But again I would not. Not yet was my wandering Jew rightly construed for me. I trust that women may not be allowed a title to all the curiosity in the world. So when Montopolis's oldest inhabitant, some 90 years younger than Michob Ader, dropped in to acquire promulgation in print, I siphoned his perpetual trickle of reminiscence in the direction of the uninterpreted maker of shoes. Uncle Abner was the complete history of Montopolis, bound in butternut. "A batter," he quavered, "come here in '69. He was the first shoemaker in the place. Folks generally considers him crazy at times now, but he don't harm nobody. I suppose drinkin' upset his mind. Yes, drinkin' very likely done it. It's a powerful bad thing, Drinkin'? I'm an old man, sir, and I never see no good in drinkin'. I felt disappointment. I was willing to admit drink in the case of my shoemaker, but I preferred it as a recourse instead of a cause. Why had he pitched upon his perpetual, strange note of the wandering Jew? Why his unutterable grief during his aberration? I could not yet accept whiskey as an explanation. Did Michob Ader ever have a great loss or trouble of any kind? I asked. Let me see. About 30 years ago there was something of the kind, I recollect. Montopolis, sir, in them days used to be a mighty strict place. Well, Michob Ader had a daughter then, a right pretty girl. She was too gay a sort for Montopolis, so one day she slips off to another town and runs away with a circus. It was 2 years before she comes back, all fixed up in fine clothes and rings and jewelry, to see Mike. He wouldn't have nothing to do with her, so she stays around town a while anyway. I reckon the men folks wouldn't have raised no objections, but the women egged him on to order her to leave town. But she had plenty of spunk and told him to mind their own business. So one night they decided to run her away. A crowd of men and women drove her out of her house and chased her with sticks and stones. She run to her father's door, callin' for help. Mike opens it, and when he sees who it is, he hits her with his fist and knocks her down and shuts the door. And then the crowd kept on chunking her till she run clear out of town. And the next day they finds her drowned dead in Hunter's Mill Pond. I mind it all now. That was 30 years ago. I leaned back in my non-rotary revolving chair and nodded gently, like a mandarin, at my paste pot. When old Mike has a spell, went on Uncle Abner, tepidly garrulous, he thinks he's the wandering Jew. He is, said I, nodding away. And Uncle Abner cackled insinuatingly at the editor's remark, for he was expecting at least a stickful in the personal notes of the Bugle. The Dream, by O. Henry. Murray dreamed a dream. Both psychology and science grope when they would explain to us the strange adventures of our immaterial selves when wandering in the realm of death's twin brother, sleep. This story will not attempt to be illuminative. It is no more than a record of Murray's dream. One of the most puzzling phases of that strange waking sleep is that dreams which seem to cover months or even years may take place within a few seconds or minutes. Murray was waiting in his cell in the ward of the condemned. An electric arc light in the ceiling of the corridor shone brightly upon his table. On a sheet of white paper an ant crawled wildly here and there as Murray blocked its way with an envelope. The electrocution was set for 8 o'clock in the evening. Murray smiled at the antics of the wisest of insects. There were 7 other condemned men in the chamber. Since he had been there, Murray had seen 3 taken out to their fate. 1 gone mad and fighting like a wolf caught in a trap. 1, no less mad, offering up a sanctimonious lip service to heaven. The 3rd, a weakling, collapsed and strapped to a board. He wondered with what credit to himself his own heart, foot, and face would meet his punishment. For this was his evening. He thought it must be nearly 8 o'clock. Opposite his own in the 2 rows of cells was the cage of Bonifacio, the Sicilian slayer of his betrothed and of 2 officers who came to arrest him. With him Murray had played checkers many a long hour, each calling his move to his unseen opponent across the corridor. Bonifacio's great booming voice with its indestructible singing quality called out, Mistro Murray, how you feel, all right, yes? All right, Bonifacio, said Murray steadily, as he allowed the ant to crawl upon the envelope and then dumped it gently on the stone floor. That's good, Mistro Murray. Men like us, we must die like men. My time come next week. All right. Remember, Mistro Murray, I beat you dat last game of the check. Maybe we play again some time. I don't know. Maybe we have to call it a move damn allowed to play to check where they go and send us. Bonifacio's hardened philosophy, followed closely by his deafening, musical peal of laughter, warmed rather than chilled Murray's numbed heart. Yet, Bonifacio had until next week to live. The cell dwellers heard the familiar, loud click of the steel bolts as the door at the end of the corridor was opened. 3 men came to Murray's cell and unlocked it. 2 were prison guards. The other was Lynn. No, that was in the old days. Now the Reverend Leonard Winston, a friend and neighbor from their barefoot days. I got them to let me take the prison chaplain's place, he said. as he gave Murray's hand one short, strong grip. In his left hand he held a small Bible, with his forefinger marking a page. Murray smiled slightly and arranged 2 or 3 books and some penholders orderly on his small table. He would have spoken, but no appropriate words seemed to present themselves to his mind. The prisoners had christened this cell house, 80 feet long, 28 feet wide, Limbo Lane. The regular guard of Limbo Lane, an immense, rough, kindly man, drew a pint bottle of whiskey from his pocket and offered it to Murray, saying, "It's the regular thing, you know. All has it who feel like they need a bracer. No danger of it becoming a habit with him, you see." Murray drank deep into the bottle. "That's the boy," said the guard. "Just a little nerve tonic, and everything goes smooth as silk." They stepped into the corridor, and each one of the doomed 7 knew. Limbo Lane is a world on the outside of the world. But it had learned, when deprived of one or more of the 5 senses, to make another sense supply the deficiency. Each one knew that it was nearly 8, and that Murray was to go to the chair at 8. There is also in the many Limbo Lanes an aristocracy of crime. The man who kills in the open, who beats his enemy or pursuer down, flushed by the primitive emotions and the ardor of combat, holds in contempt the human rat, the spider, and the snake. So, of the 7 condemned, only 3 called their farewells to Murray as he marched down the corridor between the 2 guards, Bonifacio, Marvin, who had killed a guard while trying to escape from the prison, and Bassett, the train robber, who was driven to it because the express messenger wouldn't raise his hands when ordered to do so. The remaining 4 smoldered, silent, in their cells, no doubt feeling their social ostracism in Limbo Lane society more keenly than they did the memory of their less picturesque offenses against the law. Murray wondered at his own calmness and nearly indifference. In the execution room were about 20 men, a congregation made up of prison officers, newspaper reporters, and lookers-on who had succeeded. Here, in the very middle of a sentence, the hand of death interrupted the telling of O. Henry's last story. He had planned to make this story different from his others, the beginning of a new series in a style he had not previously attempted. "I want to show the public," he said, "that I can write something new for me. I mean a story without slang, a straightforward dramatic plot treated in a way that will come nearer my idea of real story writing." Before starting to write the present story, he outlined briefly how he intended to develop it. Murray, the criminal accused and convicted of the brutal murder of his sweetheart, a murder prompted by jealous rage, first faces the death penalty, calm, and, to all outward appearances, indifferent to his fate. As he nears the electric chair, he is overcome by a revulsion of feeling. He is left dazed, stupefied, stunned. The entire scene in the death chamber, the witnesses, the spectators, the preparations for execution become unreal to him. The thought flashes through his brain that a terrible mistake is being made. Why is he being strapped to the chair? What has he done? What crime has he committed? In the few moments while the straps are being adjusted, a vision comes to him. He dreams a dream. He sees a little country cottage, bright, sunlit, nestling in a bower of flowers. A woman is there, and a little child. He speaks with them and finds that they are his wife, his child, and the cottage their home. So, after all, it is a mistake. Someone has frightfully, irretrievably blundered. The accusation, the trial, the conviction, the sentence to death in the electric chair, all a dream. He takes his wife in his arms and kisses the child. Yes, here is happiness. It was a dream. Then at a sign from the prison warden, the fatal current is turned on. Murray had dreamed the wrong dream. The Duel, by O. Henry. The gods, lying beside their nectar on Olympus and peeping over the edge of the cliff, perceive a difference in cities. Although it would seem that to their vision towns must appear as large or small anthills without special characteristics, yet it is not so. Studying the habits of ants from so great a height should be but a mild diversion when coupled with the soft drink that mythology tells us is their only solace. But doubtless they have amused themselves by the comparison of villages and towns, and it will be no news to them, nor perhaps to many mortals, that in one particularity New York stands unique among the cities of the world. This shall be the theme of a little story addressed to the man who sits smoking with his Sabbath-slippered feet on another chair. and to the woman who snatches the paper for a moment while boiling greens or a narcotized baby leaves her free. With these I love to sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. New York City is inhabited by 4 million mysterious strangers, thus beating Bird Center by 3 millions and half a dozen nines. They came here in various ways and for many reasons: Hendrik Hudson, the art schools, green goods, the stork, the annual dressmakers convention, the Pennsylvania Railroad, love of money, the stage, cheap excursion rates, brains, personal column ads, heavy walking shoes, ambition, freight trains. All these have had a hand in making up the population. But every man Jack, when he first sets foot on the stones of Manhattan, has got to fight. He has got to fight at once until either he or his adversary wins. There is no resting between rounds, for there are no rounds. It is slugging from the first. It is a fight to a finish. Your opponent is the city. You must do battle with it from the time the ferry boat lands you on the island until either it is yours or it has conquered you. It is the same whether you have $1 million in your pocket or only the price of a week's lodging. The battle is to decide whether you shall become a New Yorker or turn the rancorous outlander and Philistin. You must be one or the other. You cannot remain neutral. You must be for or against lover or enemy, bosom friend or outcast. And, oh, the city is a general in the ring. Not only by blows does it seek to subdue you. It woos you to its heart with the subtlety of a siren. It is a combination of Delilah, green chartreuse, Beethoven, chloral, and John L. in his best days. In other cities you may wander and abide as a stranger man as long as you please. You may live in Chicago until your hair whitens, and be a citizen and still prate of beans if Boston mothered you, and without rebuke. You may become a civic pillar in any other town but Knickerbocker's, and all the time publicly sneering at its buildings, comparing them with the architecture of Colonel Telfair's residence in Jackson, Mississippi, whence you hail, and you will not be set upon. But in New York you must be either a New Yorker or an invader of a modern Troy, concealed in the wooden horse of your conceited provincialism. And this dreary preamble is only to introduce to you the unimportant figures of William and Jack. They came out of the West together, where they had been friends. They came to dig their fortunes out of the big city. Father Knickerbocker met them at the ferry, giving one a right-hander on the nose and the other an uppercut with his left, just to let them know that the fight was on. William was for business, Jack was for art. Both were young and ambitious, so they countered and clinched. I think they were from Nebraska or possibly Missouri or Minnesota. Anyhow, they were out for success and scraps and scads, and they tackled the city like two Lachinvars with brass knucks and a pull at the city hall. 4 years afterward William and Jack met at luncheon. The businessman blew in like a March wind, hurled his silk hat at a waiter, dropped into the chair that was pushed under him, seized the bill of fare, and had ordered as far as cheese before the artist had time to do more than nod. After the nod, a humorous smile came into his eyes. "Billy," he said, "you're done for. The city has gobbled you up. It has taken you and cut you to its pattern and stamped you with its brand. You are so nearly like 10,000 men I have seen today that you couldn't be picked out from them if it weren't for your laundry marks." "Camembert," finished William. "What's that? Oh, you've still got your hammer out for New York, have you? Well, little old Noiseville on the subway is good enough for me. It's giving me mine. And say, I used to think the West was the whole round world, only slightly flattened at the poles whenever Brian ran. I used to yell myself hoarse about the free expense and hang my hat on the horizon and say cutting things in the grocery to little soap drummers from the East. But I'd never seen New York then, Jack. Me for it from the Rothskellers up. 6th Avenue is the West to me now. Have you heard this fellow Crusoe sing? The Desert Isle for him, I say, but my wife made me go. Give me May Irwin or E.S. Willard any time." "Poor Billy," said the artist, delicately fingering a cigarette. "You remember, when we were on our way to the East, how we talked about this great, wonderful city, and how we meant to conquer it and never let it get the best of us. We were going to be just the same fellows we had always been, and never let it master us. It has downed you, old man. You have changed from a maverick into a butterick." "Don't see exactly what you were driving at," said William. "I don't wear an alpaca coat with blue trousers and a seersucker vest on dress occasions, like I used to do at home. You talk about being cut to a pattern. Well, ain't the pattern all right? When you're in Rome, you've got to do as the Dagos do. This town seems to me to have other alleged metropolises skinned to flag stations. According to the railroad schedule I've got in mind, Chicago and St. Joe and Paris, France, are asterisk stops, which means you wave a red flag and get on every other Tuesday. I like this little suburb of Tarrytown on the Hudson. There's something, or somebody doing all the time. I'm clearing $8,000 a year selling automatic pumps, and I'm living like kings up. Why, yesterday, I was introduced to John W. Gates. I took an auto ride with a wine agent's sister. I saw two men run over by a streetcar, and I seen Edna May play in the evening. Talk about the West. Why, the other night I woke everybody up in the hotel hollering. I dreamed I was walking on a board sidewalk in Oshkosh. What have you got against this town, Jack? There's only one thing in it that I don't care for, and that's a ferry boat. The artist gazed dreamily at the cartridge paper on the wall. This town, said he, is a leech. It drains the blood of the country. Whoever comes to it accepts a challenge to a duel. Abandoning the figure of the leech, it is a juggernaut, a Moloch, a monster to which the innocence, the genius, and the beauty of the land must pay tribute. Hand to hand, every newcomer must struggle with the Leviathan. You've lost, Billy. It shall never conquer me. I hate it as one hates sin or pestilence or the color work in a 10-cent magazine. I despise its very vastness and power. It has the poorest millionaires, the littlest great men, the lowest skyscrapers, the dolefulest pleasures of any town I ever saw. It has caught you, old man, but I will never run beside its chariot wheels. It glosses itself as the Chinaman glosses his collars. Give me the domestic finish. I could stand a town ruled by wealth or one ruled by an aristocracy, but this is one controlled by its lowest ingredients. Claiming culture, it is the crudest. Asseverating its preeminence, it is the basest. Denying all outside values and virtue, it is the narrowest. Give me the pure and the open heart of the West Country. I would go back there tomorrow if I could. Don't you like this filet mignon ? Said William. Shucks now, what's the use to knock the town? It's the greatest ever. I couldn't sell one automatic pump between Harrisburg and Tommy O'Keefe's saloon in Sacramento, where I sell 20 here. And have you seen Sarah Bernhard in Andrew Mack yet? The town's got you, Billy, said Jack. All right, said William. I'm going to buy a cottage on Lake Ronkonkoma next summer. At midnight, Jack raised his window and sat close to it. He caught his breath at what he saw, though he had seen and felt it 100 times. Far below and around lay the city like a ragged purple dream. The irregular houses were like the broken exteriors of cliffs lining deep gulches and winding streams. Some were mountainous, some lay in long, desert canyons. Such was the background of the wonderful, cruel, enchanting, bewildering, fatal, great city. But into this background were cut myriads of brilliant parallelograms and circles and squares through which glowed many-colored lights. And out of the violet and purple depths ascended like the city's soul sounds and odors and thrills that make up the civic body. There arose the breath of gaiety unrestrained, of love, of hate, of all the passions that man can know. There below him lay all things, good or bad, that can be brought from the four corners of the earth to instruct, please, thrill, enrich, despoil, elevate, cast down, nurture, or kill. Thus the flavor of it came up to him and went into his blood. There was a knock on his door. A telegram had come for him. It came from the West, and these were its words. Come back and the answer will be yes. Dolly. He kept the boy waiting 10 minutes, and then wrote the reply, impossible to leave here at present. Then he sat at the window again, and let the city put its cup of mandragora to his lips again. After all, it isn't a story, but I wanted to know which one of the heroes won the battle against the city. So I went to a very learned friend and laid the case before him. What he said was, please don't bother me. I have Christmas presents to buy. So there it rests, and you will have to decide for yourself. The Duplicity of Hargraves, by O. Henry. When Major Pendleton Talbot, of Mobile, Sir, and his daughter, Miss Lydia Talbot, came to Washington to reside, they selected for a boarding place a house that stood 50 yards back from one of the quietest avenues. It was an old-fashioned brick building, with a portico upheld by tall white pillars. The yard was shaded by stately locusts and elms, and a catalpa tree in season rained its pink and white blossoms upon the grass. Rows of high box bushes lined the fence and walks. It was the southern style and aspect of the place that pleased the eyes of the Talbots. In this pleasant, private boarding house they engaged rooms, including a study for Major Talbot, who was adding the finishing chapters to his book, Anecdotes and Reminiscences of the Alabama Army, Bench and Bar. Major Talbot was of the old South. The present day had little interest or excellence in his eyes. His mind lived in that period before the Civil War, when the Talbots owned thousands of acres of fine cotton land and the slaves to till them, when the family mansion was the scene of princely hospitality and drew its guests from the aristocracy of the South. Out of that period he had brought all its old pride and scruples of honor, an antiquated and punctilious politeness, and you would think its wardrobe. Such clothes were surely never made within 50 years. The Major was tall, but whenever he made that wonderful, archaic genuflection he called a bow, the corners of his frock coat swept the floor. That garment was a surprise even to Washington, which has long ago ceased to shy at the frocks and broad-brimmed hats of Southern congressmen. One of the boarders christened it a Father Hubbard, and it certainly was high in the waist and full in the skirt. But the Major, with all his queer clothes, his immense area of plaited, revealing shirt bosom, and the little black string tie with the bow always slipping on one side, both was smiled at and liked in Mrs. Vardman's select boarding house. Some of the young department clerks would often string him, as they called it, getting him started upon the subject dearest to him, the traditions and history of his beloved Southland. During his talks, he would quote freely from the Anecdotes and Reminiscences, but they were very careful not to let him see their designs, for in spite of his 68 years, he could make the boldest of them uncomfortable under the steady regard of his piercing gray eyes. Miss Lydia was a plump, little old maid of 35, with smoothly drawn, tightly twisted hair that made her look still older. Old-fashioned, too, she was, but antebellum glory did not radiate from her as it did from the Major. She possessed a thrifty common sense, and it was she who handled the finances of the family and met all comers when there were bills to pay. The Major regarded board bills and wash bills as contemptible nuisances. They kept coming in so persistently and so often. Why, the Major wanted to know, could they not be filed and paid in a lump sum at some convenient period, say when the Anecdotes and Reminiscences had been published and paid for? Miss Lydia would calmly go on with her sewing and say, "We'll pay as we go as long as the money lasts, and then perhaps they'll have to lump it." Most of Mrs. Vardman's boarders were away during the day, being nearly all department clerks and businessmen, but there was one of them who was about the house a great deal from morning to night. This was a young man named Henry Hopkins Hargraves. Everyone in the house addressed him by his full name, who was engaged at one of the popular vaudeville theaters. Vaudeville has risen to such a respectable plane in the last few years, and Mr. Hargraves was such a modest and well-mannered person that Mrs. Vardman could find no objection to enrolling him upon her list of boarders. At the theater, Hargraves was known as an all-round dialect comedian, having a large repertoire of German, Irish, Swede, and blackface specialties. But Mr. Hargraves was ambitious and often spoke of his great desire to succeed in legitimate comedy. This young man appeared to conceive a strong fancy for Major Talbot. Whenever that gentleman would begin his Southern reminiscences or repeat some of the liveliest of the anecdotes, Hargraves could always be found the most attentive among his listeners. For a time, the Major showed an inclination to discourage the advances of the play actor, as he privately termed him. But soon the young man's agreeable manner and indubitable appreciation of the old gentleman's stories completely won him over. It was not long before the two were like old chums. The Major set apart each afternoon to read to him the manuscript of his book. During the anecdotes, Hargraves never failed to laugh at exactly the right point. The Major was moved to declare to Miss Lydia one day that young Hargraves possessed remarkable perception and a gratifying respect for the old regime. And when it came to talking of those old days, if Major Talbot liked to talk, Mr. Hargraves was entranced to listen. Like almost all old people who talk of the past, the Major loved to linger over details. In describing the splendid, almost royal, days of the old planters, he would hesitate until he had recalled the name of the Negro who held his horse, or the exact date of certain minor happenings, or the number of bales of cotton raised in such a year. But Hargraves never grew impatient or lost interest. On the contrary, he would advance questions on a variety of subjects connected with the life of that time, and he never failed to extract ready replies. The fox hunts, the possum suppers, the hoedowns and jubilees in the Negro quarters, the banquets in the plantation house hall, when invitations went for 50 miles around, the occasional feuds with the neighboring gentry, the Major's duel with Rathbone Culbertson about Kitty Chalmers, who afterward married a Thwaite of South Carolina, and private yacht races for fabulous sums on Mobile Bay, the quaint beliefs, improvident habits, and loyal virtues of the old slaves, all these were subjects that held both the Major and Hargraves absorbed for hours at a time. Sometimes, at night, when the young man would be coming upstairs to his room after his turn at the theater was over, the Major would appear at the door of his study and beckon archly to him. Going in, Hargraves would find a little table set with a decanter, sugar bowl, fruit, and a big bunch of fresh green mint. It occurred to me, the Major would begin, he was always ceremonious, that perhaps you might have found your duties at your place of occupation sufficiently arduous to enable you, Mr. Hargraves, to appreciate what the poet might well have had in his mind when he wrote, "Tired nature's sweet restorer, one of our southern juleps." It was a fascination to Hargraves to watch him make it. He took rank among artists when he began, and he never varied the process. With what delicacy he bruised the mint, with what exquisite nicety he estimated the ingredients, with what solicitous care he capped the compound with the scarlet fruit glowing against the dark green fringe, and then the hospitality and grace with which he offered it, after the selected oat straws had been plunged into its tinkling depths. After about 4 months in Washington, Miss Lydia discovered one morning that they were almost without money. The Anecdotes and Reminiscences was completed, but publishers had not jumped at the collected gems of Alabama sense and wit. The rental of a small house which they still owned in Mobile was 2 months in arrears. Their board money for the month would be due in 3 days. Miss Lydia called her father to a consultation. "No money," said he with a surprised look. "It is quite annoying to be called on so frequently for these petty sums. Really, The Major searched his pockets. He found only a $2 bill, which he returned to his vest pocket. "I must attend to this at once, Lydia," he said. "Kindly get me my umbrella, and I will go downtown immediately. The congressman from our district, General Fulgham, assured me some days ago that he would use his influence to get my book published at an early date. I will go to his hotel at once and see what arrangement has been made." With a sad little smile, Miss Lydia watched him button his Father Hubbard and depart, pausing at the door, as he always did, to bow profoundly. That evening, at dark, he returned. It seemed that Congressman Fulgham had seen the publisher who had the Major's manuscript for reading. That person had said that if the anecdotes, etc., were carefully pruned down about 1/2, in order to eliminate the sectional and class prejudice with which the book was dyed from end to end, he might consider its publication. The Major was in a white heat of anger, but regained his equanimity, according to his code of manners, as soon as he was in Miss Lydia's presence. "We must have money," said Miss Lydia, with a little wrinkle above her nose. "Give me the $2, and I will telegraph to Uncle Ralph for some tonight." The Major drew a small envelope from his upper vest pocket and tossed it on the table. "Perhaps it was injudicious," he said mildly, "but the sum was so merely nominal that I bought tickets to the theater tonight. It's a new war drama, Lydia. I thought you would be pleased to witness its first production in Washington. I am told that the South has very fair treatment in the play. I confess I should like to see the performance myself." Miss Lydia threw up her hands in silent despair. Still, as the tickets were bought, they might as well be used. So that evening, as they sat in the theater listening to the lively overture, even Miss Lydia was minded to relegate their troubles, for the hour, to second place. The Major, in spotless linen, with his extraordinary coat showing only where it was closely buttoned, and his white hair smoothly roached, looked really fine and distinguished. The curtain went up on the first act of A Magnolia Flower, revealing a typical Southern plantation scene. Major Talbot betrayed some interest. "Oh, see!" exclaimed Miss Lydia, nudging his arm and pointing to her program. The Major put on his glasses and read the line in the cast of characters that her finger indicated. "Colonel Webster Calhoun, H. Hopkins Hargraves." "It's our Mr. Hargraves," said Miss Lydia. "It must be his first appearance in what he calls the legitimate. I'm so glad for him." Not until the second act did Colonel Webster Calhoun appear upon the stage. When he made his entry, Major Talbot gave an audible sniff, glared at him, and seemed to freeze solid. Miss Lydia uttered a little, ambiguous squeak and crumpled her program in her hand. For Colonel Calhoun was made up as nearly resembling Major Talbot as one pea does another. The long, thin white hair, curly at the ends, the aristocratic beak of a nose, the crumpled, wide, revealing shirt front, the string tie, with the bow nearly under one ear, were almost exactly duplicated. And then, to clinch the imitation, he wore the twin to the Major's supposed to be unparalleled coat, high-collared, baggy, empire-waisted, ample-skirted, hanging a foot lower in front than behind. The garment could have been designed from no other pattern. From then on, the Major and Miss Lydia sat bewitched and saw the counterfeit presentment of a haughty Talbot dragged, as the Major afterward expressed it, through the slanderous mire of a corrupt age. Mr. Hargraves had used his opportunities well. He had caught the Major's little idiosyncrasies of speech, accent, and intonation and his pompous courtliness to perfection, exaggerating all to the purposes of the stage. When he performed that marvelous bow that the Major fondly imagined to be the pink of all salutations, the audience sent forth a sudden round of hearty applause. Miss Lydia sat immovable, not daring to glance toward her father. Sometimes her hand next to him would be laid against her cheek, as if to conceal the smile which, in spite of her disapproval, she could not entirely suppress. The culmination of Hargraves's audacious imitation took place in the third act. The scene is where Colonel Calhoun entertains a few of the neighboring planters in his den. Standing at a table in the center of the stage, with his friends grouped about him, he delivers that inimitable, rambling, character monologue so famous in A Magnolia Flower, at the same time that he deftly makes juleps for the party. Major Talbot, sitting quietly, but white with indignation, heard his best stories retold, his pet theories and hobbies advanced and expanded, and the dream of the anecdotes and reminiscences served, exaggerated, and garbled. His favorite narrative, that of his duel with Rathbone Culbertson, was not omitted, and it was delivered with more fire, egotism, and gusto than the Major himself put into it. The monologue concluded with a quaint, delicious, witty little lecture on the art of concocting a julep, illustrated by the act. Here Major Talbot's delicate but showy science was reproduced to a hair's breadth, from his dainty handling of the fragrant weed, the 1,000th part of a grain too much pressure, gentlemen, and you extract the bitterness, instead of the aroma, of this heaven-bestowed plant, to his solicitous selection of the oaten straws. At the close of the scene, the audience raised a tumultuous roar of appreciation. The portrayal of the type was so exact, so sure and thorough, that the leading characters in the play were forgotten. After repeated calls, Hargraves came before the curtain and bowed, his rather boyish face bright and flushed with the knowledge of success. At last Miss Lydia turned and looked at the Major. His thin nostrils were working like the gills of a fish. He laid both shaking hands upon the arms of his chair to rise. "We will go, Lydia," he said chokingly. "This is an abominable desecration." Before he could rise, she pulled him back into his seat. "We will stay it out," she declared. "Do you want to advertise the copy by exhibiting the original coat?" So they remained to the end. Hargraves's success must have kept him up late that night, for neither at the breakfast nor at the dinner table did he appear. About 3 in the afternoon, he tapped at the door of Major Talbot's study. The Major opened it, and Hargraves walked in with his hands full of the morning papers, too full of his triumph to notice anything unusual in the Major's demeanor. I put it all over him last night, Major, he began exultantly. I had my inning, and, I think, scored. Here's what his conception and portrayal of the old-time Southern colonel, with his absurd grandiloquence, his eccentric garb, his quaint idioms and phrases, his moth-eaten pride of family, and his really kind heart, fastidious sense of honor, and lovable simplicity, is the best delineation of a character role on the boards today. The coat worn by Colonel Calhoun is itself nothing less than an evolution of genius. Mr. Hargraves has captured his public. How does that sound, Major, for a first-nighter? I had the honor, the Major's voice sounded ominously frigid, of witnessing your very remarkable performance, sir, last night. Hargraves looked disconcerted. You were there? I didn't know you cared for the theater. Oh, I say, Major Talbot, he exclaimed frankly, don't you be offended. I admit I did get a lot of pointers from you that helped me out wonderfully in the part, but it's a type, not individual. The way the audience caught on shows that. Half the patrons of that theater are Southerners. They recognized it. Mr. Hargraves, said the Major, who had remained standing, you have put upon me an unpardonable insult. You have burlesqued my person, grossly betrayed my confidence, and misused my hospitality. If I thought you possessed the faintest conception of what is the sign manual of a gentleman, or what is due one, I would call you out, sir, old as I am. I will ask you to leave the room, sir. The actor appeared to be slightly bewildered, and seemed hardly to take in the full meaning of the old gentleman's words. I am truly sorry you took offense, he said regretfully. Up here we don't look at things just as you people do. I know men who would buy out half the house to have their personality put on the stage so the public would recognize it. They are not from Alabama, sir, said the Major haughtily. Perhaps not. I have a pretty good memory, Major. Let me quote a few lines from your book. In response to a toast at a banquet given in Milledgeville, I believe, you uttered, and intend to have printed, these words. The Northern man is utterly without sentiment or warmth except in so far as the feelings may be turned to his own commercial profit. He will suffer without resentment any imputation cast upon the honor of himself or his loved ones that does not bear with it the consequence of pecuniary loss. In his charity, he gives with a liberal hand, but it must be heralded with the trumpet and chronicled in brass. Do you think that picture is fairer than the one you saw of Colonel Calhoun last night? The description, said the Major frowning, is not without grounds. Some latitude must be allowed in public speaking. And in public acting, replied Hargraves. That is not the point, persisted the Major, unrelenting. It was a personal caricature. I positively decline to overlook it, sir. Major Talbot, said Hargraves with a winning smile, I wish you would understand me. I want you to know that I never dreamed of insulting you. In my profession, all life belongs to me. I take what I want and what I can and return it over the footlights. Now, if you will, let's let it go at that. I came in to see you about something else. We've been pretty good friends for some months, and I'm going to take the risk of offending you again. I know you are hard up for money. Never mind how I found out. A boarding house is no place to keep such matters secret, and I want you to let me help you out of the pinch. I've been there often enough myself. I've been getting a fair salary all the season, and I've saved some money. You're welcome to a couple hundred, or even more, until you get. Stop, commanded the Major, with his arm outstretched. It seems that my book didn't lie, after all. You think your money salve will heal all the hurts of honor. Under no circumstances would I accept a loan from a casual acquaintance. And as to you, sir, I would starve before I would consider your insulting offer of a financial adjustment of the circumstances we have discussed. I beg to repeat my request relative to your quitting the apartment. Hargraves took his departure without another word. He also left the house the same day, moving, as Mrs. Vardman explained at the supper table, nearer the vicinity of the downtown theater, where A Magnolia Flower was booked for a week's run. Critical was the situation with Major Talbot and Miss Lydia. There was no one in Washington to whom the Major's scruples allowed him to apply for a loan. Miss Lydia wrote a letter to Uncle Ralph, but it was doubtful whether that relative's constricted affairs would permit him to furnish help. The major was forced to make an apologetic address to Mrs. Vardman regarding the delayed payment for board, referring to delinquent rentals and delayed remittances in a rather confused strain. Deliverance came from an entirely unexpected source. Late one afternoon, the door maid came up and announced an old colored man who wanted to see Major Talbot. The major asked that he be sent up to his study. Soon an old darky appeared in the doorway, with his hat in hand, bowing and scraping with one clumsy foot. He was quite decently dressed in a baggy suit of black. His big, coarse shoes shone with a metallic luster suggestive of stove polish. His bushy wool was gray, almost white. After middle life, it is difficult to estimate the age of a Negro. This one might have seen as many years as had Major Talbot. "I be bound you don't know me, Mars Pendleton," were his first words. The major rose and came forward at the old, familiar style of address. It was one of the old plantation darkies without a doubt, but they had been widely scattered, and he could not recall the voice or face. "I don't believe I do," he said kindly, "unless you will assist my memory. Don't you remember Cindy's Mose, Mars Pendleton, what migrated immediately after the war?" "Wait a moment," said the major, rubbing his forehead with the tips of his fingers. He loved to recall everything connected with those beloved days. "Cindy's Mose," he reflected. "You worked among the horses, breaking the colts." "Yes, I remember now. After the surrender, you took the name of, don't prompt me, Mitchell, and went to the west, to Nebraska." "Yasser, yasser." The old man's face stretched with a delighted grin. "Dat's him, dat's it. Nebraska. Dat's me, Mose Mitchell. Old Uncle Mose Mitchell, dey calls me now. Old Mars, your pa, gimme a pa of dem mule colts when I left, fur to stop me going with. You 'member dem colts, Mars Pendleton?" "I don't seem to recall the colts," said the major. "You know I was married the first year of the war and living at the old Follansbee place. But sit down, Uncle Mose. I'm glad to see you. I hope you have prospered." Uncle Mose took a chair and laid his hat carefully on the floor beside it. "Yasser, of late I done mouty famous. When I first got to Nebraska, dey folks come all round me to see dem mule colts. Dey ain't see no mules like dem in Nebraska. I sold dem mules for $300. Yasser, 300. Den I opened a blacksmith shop, Sue, and made some money and bought some lawn. Me and my old oman done raised up 7 chillin, and all doin' well 'cept 2 of 'em what died. A year ago, a railroad come along and started town slam against my lawn. And Sue, Mars Pendleton, Uncle Mose am worth $11,000 in money, property, and lawn." "I'm glad to hear it," said the major heartily. "Glad to hear it. And dat little baby of yo'n, Mars Pendleton, one what you name Miss Lyddy, I be bound dat little tad done growed up tell nobody wouldn't know her." The major stepped to the door and called, "Lydia, dear. Will you come?" Miss Lydia, looking quite grown up and a little worried, came in from her room. "Darn now, what did I tell you? I know dat baby done be plumb growed up. You don't 'member Uncle Mose, child?" "This is Aunt Cindy's Mose, Lydia," explained the major. "He left Sunamede for the West when you were 2 years old." "Well," said Miss Lydia, "I can hardly be expected to remember you, Uncle Mose, at that age. And as you say, I'm plumb growed up, and was a blessed long time ago. But I'm glad to see you, even if I can't remember you." And she was. And so was the major. Something alive and tangible had come to link them with the happy past. The three sat and talked over the olden times, the major and Uncle Mose correcting or prompting each other as they reviewed the plantation scenes and days. The major inquired what the old man was doing so far from his home. "Uncle Mose am a delegate," he explained, "to de Grand Baptist Convention in dis city. I never preached none, but bein' a resident elder in de church and able fur to pay my own expenses, dey sent me along." "And how did you know we were in Washington?" inquired Miss Lydia. "Dey's a colored man works in de hotel where I stops, what comes from Mobile. He told me he seen Mars Pendleton comin' out in dish here house one morning. What I come fur," continued Uncle Mose, reaching into his pocket, "besides the sight of home folks, was to pay Mars Pendleton what I owes him." "Oh me," said the major in surprise. Yasser, $300. He handed the major a roll of bills. When I left, old Mars says, take dem mule colts, Mose, and if it be so you gets able, pay firm. Yasser, dem was his words. De war had done left old Mars poo hisself. Old Mars being long ago dead, the debt descends to Mars Pendleton. $300. Uncle Mose is plenty able to pay now. When dat railroad by my lawn, I laid off to pay fur dim mules. Count the money, Mars Pendleton. That's what I sold dim mules fur. Yasser. Tears were in Major Talbot's eyes. He took Uncle Mose's hand and laid his other upon his shoulder. Dear, faithful old servitor, he said in an unsteady voice, I don't mind saying to you that Mars Pendleton spent his last dollar in the world a week ago. We will accept this money, Uncle Mose, since, in a way, it is a sort of payment, as well as a token of the loyalty and devotion of the old regime. Lydia, my dear, take the money. You are better fitted than I to manage its expenditure. Take it, honey, said Uncle Mose. It belongs to you. It's Talbot money. After Uncle Mose had gone, Miss Lydia had a good cry for joy, and the major turned his face to a corner and smoked his clay pipe volcanically. The succeeding days saw the Talbots restored to peace and ease. Miss Lydia's face lost its worried look. The major appeared in a new frock coat, in which he looked like a wax figure personifying the memory of his golden age. Another publisher who read the manuscript of the Anecdotes and Reminiscences thought that, with a little retouching and toning down of the highlights, he could make a really bright and saleable volume of it. Altogether, the situation was comfortable, and not without the touch of hope that is often sweeter than arrived blessings. One day, about a week after their piece of good luck, a maid brought a letter for Miss Lydia to her room. The postmark showed that it was from New York. Not knowing anyone there, Miss Lydia, in a mild flutter of wonder, sat down by her table and opened the letter with her scissors. This was what she read. Dear Miss Talbot, I thought you might be glad to learn of my good fortune. I have received and accepted an offer of $200 per week by a New York stock company to play Colonel Calhoun in A Magnolia Flower. There is something else I wanted you to know. I guess you'd better not tell Major Talbot. I was anxious to make him some amends for the great help he was to me in studying the part and for the bad humor he was in about it. He refused to let me, so I did it anyhow. I could easily spare the $300. Sincerely yours, H. Hopkins Hargraves. P.S. How did I play Uncle Mose? Major Talbot, passing through the hall, saw Miss Lydia's door open and stopped. Any mail for us this morning, Lydia, dear? He asked. Miss Lydia slid the letter beneath a fold of her dress. The _mobile chronicle _ came, she said promptly. It's on the table in your study. The Easter of the Soul, by O. Henry. It is hardly likely that a goddess may die. Then Easter, the old Saxon goddess of spring, must be laughing in her muslin sleeve at people who believe that Easter, her namesake, exists only along certain strips of Fifth Avenue pavement after church service. Aye, it belongs to the world. The ptarmigan in Chilkoot Pass discards his winter white feathers for brown. The Patagonian Beau Brummel oils his non and clubs him another sweetheart to drag to his skull-strewn flat. And down in Christie Street, Mr. Tiger McQuirk arose with a feeling of disquiet that B did not understand. With a practised foot B rolled three of his younger brothers like logs out of his way as they lay sleeping on the floor. Before a foot-square looking glass hung by the wind, down he stood and shaved himself. If that may seem to you a task too slight to be thus impressively chronicled, I bear with you. You do not know of the areas to be accomplished in traversing the cheek and chin of Mr. McQuirk. McQuirk, Sr., had gone to work long before. The big son of the house was idle. He was a marble cutter, and the marble cutters were out on a strike. What ails ye? Asked his mother, looking at him curiously. Are ye not feeling well the morning, maybe now? He's thinking along of Annie Maria Doyle, impudently explained younger brother Tim, 10 years old. Tiger reached over the hand of a champion and swept the small McQuirk from his chair. I feel fine, said he, beyond a touch of the I don't know. I feel like there was going to be earthquakes or music or a trifle of chills and fever or maybe a picnic. I don't know how I feel. I feel like knocking the face off a policeman, or else maybe like playing Coney Island straight across the board from popcorn to the elephant boot abs. It's the spring in your bones, said Mrs. McQuirk. It's the sap risin'. Time was when I couldn't keep me feet still nor me head cool when the earthworms began to crawl out in the dew of the mornin'. 'Tis a bit of tea will do ye good, made from pipsissewa and gentian bark at the druggist's. Back up, said Mr. McQuirk impatiently. There's no spring in sight. There's snow yet on the shed in Donovan's backyard. And yesterday they puts open cars on the 6th Avenue lines, and the janitors have quit ordering coal. And that means 6 weeks more of winter, by all the signs that be. After breakfast, Mr. McQuirk spent 15 minutes before the corrugated mirror, subjugating his hair and arranging his green and purple ascot with its amethyst tombstone pin eloquent of his chosen calling. Since the strike had been called, it was this particular striker's habit to hie himself each morning to the corner saloon of Flaherty Brothers, and there establish himself upon the sidewalk, with one foot resting on the bootblack stand, observing the panorama of the street until the pace of time brought 12 o'clock and the dinner hour. And Mr. Tiger McQuirk, with his athletic 70 inches, well trained in sport and battle, his smooth, pale, solid, amiable face, blue where the razor had traveled, his carefully considered clothes and air of captivated, was himself a spectacle not displeasing to the eye. But on this morning Mr. McQuirk did not hasten immediately to his post of leisure and observation. Something unusual that he could not quite grasp was in the air. Something disturbed his thoughts, ruffled his senses, made him at once languid, irritable, elated, dissatisfied, and sportive. He was no diagnostician, and he did not know that Lent was breaking up physiologically in his system. Mrs. McQuirk had spoken of spring. Skeptically, Tiger looked about him for signs. Few they were. The organ grinders were at work, but they were always precocious harbingers. It was near enough spring for them to go penny hunting when the skating ball dropped at the park. In the milliner's windows Easter hats, grave, gay and jubilant, blossomed. There were green patches among the walk debris of the grocers. On a third-story window, still the first elbow cushion of the season, old gold stripes on a crimson ground, supported the chemo-node arms of a pensive brunette. The wind blew cold from the East River, but the sparrows were flying to the eaves with straws. A second-hand store, combining foresight with faith, had set out an ice, chest, and baseball goods. And then Tiger's eye, discrediting these signs, fell upon one that bore a bud of promise. From a bright, new lithograph the head of Capricornus Con fronted him, betokening the forward and heady brew. Mr. McQuirk entered the saloon and called for his glass of bock. He threw his nickel on the bar, raised the glass, set it down without tasting it, and strolled toward the door. "What's the matter, Lord Bolingbroke?" inquired the sarcastic bartender. "Want a chiny vase or a gold-lined ipern to drink it out of, hey?" "Say," said Mr. McQuirk, wheeling and shooting out a horizontal hand and a 45-degree chin. "You know your place only when it comes for givin' titles. I've changed me mind about drinkin'. See? You got your money, ain't you? Wait till you get stung before you get the droop to your lip, will you?" Thus Mr. Quirk added mutability of desires to the strange humors that had taken possession of him. Leaving the saloon, he walked away 20 steps and leaned in the open doorway of Lutz, the barber. He and Lutz were friends, masking their sentiments behind abuse and bludgeons of repartee. "Irish loafer," roared Lutz. "How do you do? So, not yet half der policeman's or der catcher of dogs done dare duty." "Hello, Dutch," said Mr. McQuirk. "Can't get your mind off of Frankfurters, can you?" "Bah!" exclaimed the German, coming and lean, ing in the door. "I half a soul above Frankfurters today. Dear is springtime in der air. I can feel it coming in over der mud of der streets and das ice in der river. Soon will dear be bionics in der islands, MIT kegs of beer under der trees." "Say," said Mr. McQuirk, setting his bat on one side, "is everybody kiddin' me about gentle spring? There ain't any more spring in the air than there is in a horsehair sofa in a Second Avenue furnished room. For me the winter underwear yet, and the buckwheat cakes." "You have no poetry," said Lutz. "True, it is yet cold. You in der city we have not many of der signs. But dear are dree kinds of beable, should always feel der approach of spring first, day are poets, lovers, and poor widows. Mr. McQuirk went on his way, still possessed by the strange perturbation that he did not understand. Something was lacking to his comfort, and it made him half angry because he did not know what it was. 2 blocks away he came upon a foe, one Conover, whom he was bound in honor to engage in combat. Mr. McQuirk made the attack with the characteristic suddenness and fierceness that had gained for him the endearing sobriquet of Tiger. The defense of Mr. Conover was so prompt and admirable that the conflict was protracted until the onlookers-on selfishly gave the warning cry of, "Cheese it, the cop." The principals escaped easily by running through the nearest open doors into the communicating backyards at the rear of the houses. Mr. McQuirk emerged into another street. He stood by a lamppost for a few minutes engaged in thought, and then he turned and plunged into a small notion and news shop. A red-haired young woman, eating gumdrops, came and looked freezingly at him across the icebound steps of the counter. "Say, lady," he said, "have you got a song book with this in it? Let's see how it leads off. When the springtime comes, well wander in the dale, love, and whisper of those days of yore." "I'm having a friend," explained Mr. McQuirk, laid up with a broken leg, "and he sent me after it. He's a devil for songs and poetry when he can't get out to drink." "We have not," replied the young woman, with unconcealed contempt. "But there is a new song out that begins this way. Let us sit together in the old armchair, and while the firelight flickers we'll be comfortable there. There will be no profit in following Mr. Tiger McQuirk through his further vagaries of that day until he comes to stand knocking at the door of Annie Maria Doyle. The goddess Easter, it seems, had guided his footsteps aright at last. "Is that you now, Jimmy McQuirk?" she cried, smiling through the open door. Annie Maria had never accepted the Tiger. "Well, whatever. Come out in the ball," said Mr. McQuirk. "I want to ask your opinion of the weather, on the level." "Are you crazy, sure?" said Annie Maria. "I am," said the Tiger. "They've been telling me all day there was spring in the air. Were they liars? Or am I?" "Dear me," said Annie Maria. "Haven't you tasted it? I can almost smell the violets. And the green grass. Of course, there ain't any yet. It's just a kind of feeling, "That's what I'm getting at," said Mr. McQuirk. "I've had it. I didn't recognize it at first. I thought maybe it was contracted the other day when I stepped above 14th Street. But the Katzenjammer I've got don't spell violets. It spells your own name, Annie Maria, and it's you I want. I go to work next Monday, and I make $4 a day. Spiel up, old girl. Do we make a team?" "Jimmy," sighed Annie Maria, suddenly disappearing in his overcoat. "Don't you see that spring is all over the world right this minute? But you yourself remember how that day ended. Beginning with so fine a promise of vernal things. Late in the afternoon the air chilled and an inch of snow fell, even so late in March. On Fifth Ave, the ladies drew their winter furs close about them. Only in the florist's windows could be perceived any signs of the morning smile of the coming goddess Easter. At 6 o'clock her Lutz began to close his shop. He beard a well-known shout, "Hello, Dutch." Tiger McQuirk, in his shirt sleeves, with his hat on the back of his bead, stood outside in the whirling snow, puffing at a black cigar. "Donnerwetter," shouted Lutz. "Der Winter, he has gone back again yet." "You're a liar, Dutch," called back Mr. McQuirk, with friendly geniality. "It's springtime, by the watch."